Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Since November last year, Paul Nuttall has been the leader of the UK Independence Party. He was already a member of the European Parliament. At the time of his election to the post, he promised there'll be one theme, unity, because only unity breeds success. Now, he's fighting a by-election to try to become MP for Stoke-on-Trent Central. As that campaign goes on, Paul Nuttall's had to talk about something that happened many years ago. The Hillsborough disaster of 1989, in which 96 people were killed and more than 700 were injured. It was the worst disaster in the history of sport in Britain. The question that's been asked is, was Paul Nuttall there, as he says he was? The first time Paul Nuttall's known to have said he was present at the Hillsborough disaster was 2009. He chaired UKIP back then and was talking about the fact that the then Prime Minister Gordon Brown would not be attending events to mark the 20th anniversary. Paul Nuttall said, "I was lucky that day. As a 12-year-old, I walked away, but too many did not, were crushed and killed, and we need to find out why, who made the mistakes. Gordon Brown will not be welcome in Liverpool after the slap in the face he's given today." In 2010, Paul Nuttall wrote to the Liverpool Echo, "Tory MP Jeremy Hunt's link between Hillsborough and hooligans is completely unacceptable," he wrote. "It is a disgrace to say that innocent victims of a tragic disaster are in the same league as drunken, violent thugs. I was at Hillsborough that day, and I'm deeply offended by Jeremy Hunt's remarks. I believe he should publicly apologise." Last May, Paul Nuttall spoke to the BBC's Arif Ansari about the Hillsborough inquest verdicts on the Sunday Politics programme in the northwest of England.
How did you feel when those verdicts came through?
A sense of joy, a sense of vindication. It was 27 years this took. And we all knew that the fans were not to blame. And people like myself who were in the Leppens Lane end, we knew what was going on the day. So, as I say, good luck to the families. Well done for sticking by it. And let's all move on. And, I suspect there'll be prosecutions which will come after this as well.
You want to see prosecutions?
Yes, I think people should carry the can for their actions. And, what I will say about this is I think that the FA have got off lightly in all this. There were examples of crushes in the Leppens Lane end throughout the 1980s at semi-finals. I was there the year before when we played Nottingham Forest in a semi-final, just as the one we played in 1989. And we knew something was different on the day, but at the same time, Liverpool should never have been in the Leppens Lane end anyway. The Nottingham Forest fans had the Kop, which was the opposite end, which was twice as big as the Leppens Lane end, and Liverpool were always going to take more fans. So I think, and beyond that, the kick-off should have been put back at least 15 to 30 minutes because the crush was going on outside. And I tell you what, people would have died outside. I was involved in that crush outside if those gates weren't open.
Paul Nuttall was a boy at the time of Hillsborough. He says he was there with his father and two uncles. In a recent interview with the Sunday Express, he said, "It was horrific and it's something I don't really talk about." Then this weekend, The Guardian published a story in which several people questioned whether Paul Nuttall was there. The Guardian said it had spoken to one of his former teachers, who said the school believed it had been aware of the identities of every boy who'd been at Hillsborough in order to help them through a difficult period, and that Paul Nuttall was not among them. It also carries a quote from Margaret Aspinall, who chairs the Hillsborough Family Support Group, who said she was surprised that Paul Nuttall had never offered to assist with their decades-long campaign. "I haven't heard anything about him being at the match," she said. "Has he given a statement to the police, who have said they want to hear from everyone who was there? He can't say he hasn't heard that the police want to take statements from everyone who was in the Leppens Lane, as it's been all over local and national media." With those questions being raised, UKIP gave The Guardian two statements on behalf of Paul Nuttall, one from his father and another from a UKIP employee, saying that they and Paul Nuttall had been at Hillsborough on the day of the disaster. The statement from the father begins, "I am and always have been the father of Paul Nuttall, leader of the UK Independence Party." It goes on to state that Paul Nuttall had been 13 years old at the time of the disaster, when in fact he was 12. In the Sunday Express last week, Paul Nuttall said only the scum of the earth would say he was not at Hillsborough. This morning, in an interview with BBC Radio Stoke's political reporter Emma Thomas, Paul Nuttall criticised The Guardian's coverage.
That is an absolute disgrace, an utter disgrace. I've never been so personally insulted in my life. It's upset my family. You know, it's something that I went through when I was 12. I gave the newspaper written witness statements to prove I was there, and they have written the most disgraceful article I think I've ever come across in my life.
Because when you enter into politics, you assume that you can become a target for certain things.
That should be above political point scoring. Unfortunately, some people have felt the need to chip in and try to make political points from it. I've never done that. I very rarely speak about it. You know, I don't want it to define me. I thought I'd seen everything in politics, actually. And I know it can be a pretty dirty game, but this is the lowest, the most awful thing I've ever come across. I mean, it really is pretty poor stuff.
Emma Thomas was asking the questions there. And Emma, Paul Nuttall, as I say, is standing as a candidate in the Stoke Central by-election. How important is this Hillsborough story within the context of that election?
Well, with just 10 days until the polling booths open, the UKIP campaign will hope that the story doesn't linger and that Paul Nuttall's emotional rebuttal this morning may satisfy journalists and turn attention elsewhere. The party has suggested that this is, in their words, a smear against Paul Nuttall as he bids to win a seat which would take him from the European Parliament to Westminster. But to do so, he's got to end a 67-year-long Labour hold of the seat. So it's vital for him, therefore, that campaigning continues fearlessly. Now, Stoke Central was once a safe Labour seat, but the party's majority fell to just 5,000 votes in the 2015 general election. And that, in context, was prior to Jeremy Corbyn's, shall we say, divisive leadership of the Labour Party and prior to last June's EU referendum, in which the party was a Remain voice at odds to the 70% of people in Stoke-on-Trent who voted Leave. In fact, within some wards of the Stoke Central constituency itself, this figure reached as high as 87% of people voting Leave. No surprise then that this is an attractive prospect for UKIP, as for their party leader to get a seat in the Commons. If he does so, he'll double their number of MPs from 1 to 2. Now, bookmakers currently have Labour and UKIP at 11 to 10 odds on and evens respectively. That's for their odds to win next week. Now, both parties have told me they're not taking any votes for granted. So Paul Nuttall will be hoping that any questions about his honesty, whether it be regarding football tragedies or in previous cases where he's lived, will fade fast and that he doesn't dissuade voters from supporting him. Of course, as always, a full list of all the candidates standing in next week's by-election can be found on the BBC's website.
BBC Radio Stoke's political reporter Emma Thomas.